Sit back, relax, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today's book is Martian by Andy Weir. Please let us know in the comments from where you are watching, or if there is a book you want us to summarize in future. Hello, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today, we're embarking on an extraordinary journey of survival, ingenuity, and the indomitable human spirit as we delve into a comprehensive summary of Andy Weir's modern science fiction classic, The Martian. Before we blast off with the story of astronaut Mark Watney, let's take a moment to appreciate the incredible journey of the book itself. Initially self-published in 2011, The Martian quickly garnered a massive following for its meticulous scientific accuracy and its refreshingly optimistic and humorous tone. It's a story that celebrates problem-solving, the relentless pursuit of knowledge, and the remarkable things humanity can achieve when we work together. The novel's protagonist, Mark Watney, has become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of a can-do attitude in the face of insurmountable odds. His saga is not just about surviving on a desolate planet. It's about the universal human drive to explore, to overcome, and to connect with one another across the vastness of space. As we journey through Watney's incredible ordeal, we'll explore profound themes of isolation and connection, the intricate dance between human endeavor and bureaucratic hurdles, and the sheer, unadulterated power of science to illuminate a path forward, even in the darkest of times. So, buckle up and prepare to be stranded on the red planet as we begin our detailed summary of The Martian. The biting, ochre-hued dust of Mars, a relentless and unforgiving adversary, was the first and most immediate threat to the Ares 3 mission. For astronaut and botanist Mark Watney, this swirling tempest would become the catalyst for an ordeal that would test the very limits of human endurance and ingenuity. The mission, humanity's third manned expedition to the Red Planet, was meant to be a month-long exploration of the Idalia Planitia, a vast, flat plain that held the promise of scientific discovery. The 6-person crew, under the capable command of Melissa Lewis, had been meticulously trained for every conceivable contingency. Every system had a backup, and every backup had a backup. But the ferocity of the Martian storm that descended upon them on Sol 6 of their mission was something beyond their direst simulations. The winds, howling with a force far exceeding NASA's predictions, threatened to topple the Mars Ascent Vehicle, or MAV, their only means of returning to the orbiting Hermes spacecraft. A forced evacuation was their only option. In the chaotic, windswept dash from the HAB, their surface habitat, to the MAV, disaster struck. A piece of communications antenna, torn loose by the gale, speared through Watney's suit, sending him tumbling down a steep embankment, his vital signs flatlining. In the chaos and with every second critical, Commander Lewis, believing him to be dead, made the gut-wrenching decision to leave him behind. The alternative was to risk the lives of the entire remaining crew. As the MAV clawed its way into the Martian sky, leaving the desolate landscape behind, Mark Watney was officially declared the first human to die on Mars. But Mark Watney was not dead. He was, however, in a very, very bad situation. He awoke to the shrill alarm of his suit's oxygen system, a piercing sound that cut through the haze of pain and disorientation. The antenna had impaled him, yes, but the force of the impact had also sealed the breach in his suit with his own blood. a gruesome but life-saving turn of events. His first conscious thought, a testament to his resilient and often irreverent nature, was a simple, profane exclamation of disbelief. He was alive, but he was also utterly and terrifyingly alone on a planet that was actively trying to kill him. The nearest human beings were on the Hermes, rocketing away from him at thousands of kilometers per hour, oblivious to his survival. Back on Earth, the news of his death had sent shockwaves through NASA and the world. A hero was being mourned, a life celebrated for its ultimate sacrifice in the name of exploration. Little did they know, their hero was currently performing self-surgery in the sterile confines of the Hab, removing the shrapnel from his side with a pair of forceps and a healthy dose of gallows humor. His initial assessment of his situation was grim. He had a functional, albeit slightly damaged, surface habitat, a limited supply of food, and 2 rovers for surface transportation. But the MAV, his golden ticket home, was gone. The next Ares mission, Ares 4, was scheduled to land at a different site, thousands of kilometers away in 4 years. The math was simple and brutal. He had enough food to last him for about a year, maybe a little more if he rationed strictly. 4 years was an impossible stretch. Faced with this stark reality, a lesser person might have succumbed to despair. But Mark Watney was not a lesser person. He was a scientist, an engineer, and above all, a problem solver. He understood that panic was a luxury he could not afford. Survival, he reasoned, was a series of problems to be solved, one at a time. His first and most pressing problem was food. He was a botanist, and the Hab was essentially a self-contained ecosystem. The idea, at first, seemed ludicrous. He would grow his own food on Mars. The Martian soil, he knew, was sterile and lacked the necessary bacteria for plant growth. But he had a small, vacuum-sealed supply of Earth soil brought along for analysis, teeming with the microbial life he needed. He also had a source of fertilizer that was both readily available and deeply personal, the vacuum-sealed waste of his crewmates, and of course, his own. The final ingredient was water. The Hab's water reclaimer was highly efficient, but he would need far more than it could provide to irrigate a crop. The solution, like so many of his subsequent solutions, was a daring and dangerous feat of chemistry. He would create water by extracting hydrogen from the leftover MAV fuel, a highly flammable substance called hydrazine, and then burning it in a controlled reaction with the oxygen from the Hab's atmosphere. It was a process fraught with peril, a single miscalculation, a single spark at the wrong moment, and the Hab would become a fiery tomb. But for Watney, the risk was calculated and necessary. The alternative was a slow, certain starvation. With meticulous care and a healthy dose of self-deprecating humor, which he dutifully chronicled in his log entries, he set about his task. The Hab, once a sterile scientific outpost, was transformed into a makeshift Martian farm. He painstakingly prepared the soil, mixed in the precious earth bacteria, and planted the potatoes that had been brought along for the crew's Thanksgiving dinner. The image of a lone astronaut, millions of miles from home, cultivating a garden in the red dust of Mars, would become a powerful symbol of human resilience, a testament to the idea that even in the most hostile of environments, life, and the will to live, could find a way. While Watney was busy becoming the first Martian farmer, the world mourned. On Earth, NASA held a memorial service. His crew, on their long journey home, grappled with their grief and the heavy burden of their decision. Commander Lewis, in particular, was consumed by guilt, replaying the events of the storm over and over in her mind, second-guessing every choice she had made. The narrative of Mark Watney, the fallen hero, was firmly established. But in the quiet solitude of the Acidalia planitia, the supposed dead man was watching his potato plants sprout, a tiny patch of green in a world of red. He had successfully created a sustainable food source, a monumental achievement that had pushed his scientific knowledge and his nerve to their absolute limits. But solving the food problem was only the first step. He was still isolated, a solitary voice in an empty world. He had no way of telling Earth that he was alive. Without communication, any hope of rescue was a distant, impossible dream. He had to find a way to talk to them, to bridge the vast, silent gulf that separated him from the rest of humanity. And so, with his potato farm established and his immediate survival secured, Mark Watney turned his formidable intellect to his next great challenge, reaching out across the void. His eyes and his hopes turned to the distant horizon, to a long-abandoned piece of space exploration history that might just hold the key to his salvation. The journey to resurrect his voice would be as perilous as the creation of his farm, a testament to the fact that on Mars, survival was not a single victory, but a relentless, day-by-day battle against a planet that was indifferent to his existence. With his makeshift potato farm providing a fragile hope for long-term sustenance, Mark Watney's focus shifted to the monumental task of re-establishing contact with Earth. He was a ghost on Mars, a man presumed dead, and without a voice, he would remain a ghost. The HAB's communication systems were designed for line-of-sight contact with the orbiting Hermes, and with the ship gone, they were nothing more than inert pieces of advanced technology. His only hope, a long shot of epic proportions, lay in a relic of a bygone era of space exploration, the Pathfinder probe. Launched in the late 1990s, Pathfinder and its intrepid little rover, Sojourner, had been a resounding success, capturing the world's imagination with their images of the Martian surface. The lander had long since fallen silent, its mission completed decades ago. But Watney knew that its high-gain antenna was, in theory, still pointed towards Earth. If he could reach it, if he could somehow jury-rig it to work with his own equipment, he might, just might, be able to send a signal. The problem was that Pathfinder was located in Ares Valleys, a staggering 800 kilometers away from his current position at Acidalia Planitia. A journey of that magnitude was far beyond the capabilities of the standard rovers. They were designed for short-range excursions, with limited battery life and life support. Once again, Watney found himself in his element, faced with an impossible engineering challenge. He had 2 rovers at his disposal, and he systematically began to cannibalize one to enhance the other. He stripped out non-essential systems, transferring the batteries from the donor rover to his primary vehicle, effectively doubling its range. He also had to devise a way to keep himself alive during the long, arduous journey. The rover's life support systems were not designed for extended use. He would need a way to generate oxygen and absorb the carbon dioxide he exhaled. His solution was as ingenious as it was risky. He would bring along the HAB's oxygenator, a large and power-hungry piece of equipment, and mount it on the rover. To power it, he would need to supplement the rover's solar cells with the HAB's own solar panels, creating a mobile power grid that he would have to set up and break down at each stop. It was a cumbersome and labor-intensive process, but it was the only way. He meticulously planned his route, calculating his power consumption, his oxygen needs, and his food and water supplies. Every detail was accounted for, every potential failure point analyzed. His log entries from this period are a masterclass in methodical problem-solving, interspersed with his characteristic humor, a coping mechanism against the crushing weight of his isolation. He joked about being a space pirate, commandeering the rover for his own daring escapade. But beneath the jokes lay a steely determination, a refusal to be broken by the immense odds stacked against him. The journey to Ares Valleys was a grueling test of endurance. He spent his days driving across the desolate, rock-strewn landscape of Mars, a tiny, solitary figure in a vast, empty world. The silence was profound, broken only by the hum of the rover's systems and the sound of his own breathing. At night, he would set up his camp, carefully deploying the solar panels to recharge the rover's batteries. He would eat his carefully rationed potatoes and gaze up at the alien sky, a sky filled with unfamiliar constellations and the distant, tantalizing blue dot of Earth. The psychological toll of his solitude was immense. He was the loneliest human being in the history of the universe. To combat the encroaching madness, he filled his time with routines and distractions. He listened to Commander Lewis's collection of 1970s disco music, the only personal entertainment left behind, a source of both amusement and mild torture. He meticulously documented his progress, his thoughts, and his fears in his log, a one-way conversation with a world that didn't know he was listening. He faced numerous setbacks along the way. A dust storm threatened to bury his solar panels, and he had to work frantically to clear them before his power ran out. A navigational error sent him miles off course, forcing him to backtrack and recalculate his route. Each challenge was a potential death sentence, a reminder of the razor-thin margin between survival and disaster. After weeks of relentless travel, he finally reached his destination. The site of the Pathfinder lander, a small, unassuming piece of human history sitting silently in the red dust, was a moment of profound significance. It was a tangible link to home, a symbol of the enduring human spirit of exploration. But his work was far from over. He now had to perform the delicate and complex task of resurrecting the long-dead probe. He dug it out of the Martian soil that had partially buried it, his movements careful and precise. He then began the painstaking process of connecting it to his rover's systems, a feat of electrical engineering that required all of his skill and ingenuity. He had to bypass Pathfinder's dead battery, power up its systems, and most importantly, aim its antenna with pinpoint accuracy towards Earth. He had no way of knowing if it would work. He was operating on theory and hope, a blind faith in the laws of physics and the durability of human technology. He sent a simple signal, a basic hello, to a world that had long since forgotten about the silent probe in Ares Valleys. And then he waited. The minutes stretched into hours, the silence of the Martian landscape amplifying the tension. He had done everything he could. The rest was up to the vast, empty space between Mars and Earth. The weight of his isolation, the culmination of all his struggles, pressed down on him in that moment. He had gambled everything on this one desperate attempt to break his silence. If it failed, he would be well and truly alone, his fragile hope extinguished. Back on Earth, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, a young satellite communications engineer named Mindy Park was performing her routine daily check of the Deep Space Network. Her job was to monitor the signals from NASA's various probes and satellites scattered throughout the solar system. It was usually a quiet and uneventful task. But on this particular day, she noticed something anomalous, a faint, unexpected signal coming from the vicinity of Mars. It was a signal from a probe that should have been dead for decades, Pathfinder. Her initial reaction was disbelief. It had to be a glitch, a system error. But the signal persisted, weak but undeniable. She cross-referenced the data, checked and rechecked her instruments. The conclusion was inescapable. Someone or something was trying to communicate from Mars. The implications were staggering. When she brought her findings to her superiors, she was met with skepticism and caution. But as more and more experts were brought in to analyze the signal, the truth began to dawn on them. The signal was not a random anomaly. It was intelligent, it was deliberate, and it was coming from the Ares 3 landing site. The impossible, the unthinkable, had happened. Mark Watney was alive. The news spread through NASA like a shockwave, a mixture of joyous disbelief and dawning horror. They had left a man behind. They had mourned a man who was fighting for his life, alone, on a hostile world. The elation of his survival was immediately tempered by the crushing weight of their responsibility. They had to get him back. But how do you rescue a man from Mars when the nearest ride is 4 years away? The question hung in the air at NASA, a challenge of unprecedented scale and complexity. The world was about to learn that Mark Watney was alive, and the greatest rescue mission in human history was about to begin. The lone voice from Mars had been heard, and humanity was listening. The confirmation that Mark Watney was alive sent a seismic shock through the corridors of NASA. The initial elation was quickly replaced by a daunting and unprecedented challenge. The director of NASA, Teddy Sanders, found himself in the unenviable position of having to announce to the world that not only had they left a man behind on Mars, but that he was still alive, and they had no immediate way to rescue him. The political and public relations fallout would be immense. Annie Montrose, the sharp and pragmatic head of NASA's media relations, immediately went into crisis mode, carefully crafting the narrative that would be presented to the public. The focus had to be on the miracle of Watney's survival and the unwavering commitment to bring him home, not on the colossal error that had led to his abandonment. The news, when it finally broke, was a global phenomenon. The story of the stranded astronaut, the real-life Robinson Crusoe of the space age, captured the imagination and sympathy of the entire planet. The world watched, breathless, as NASA scrambled to formulate a plan. The first order of business was to establish two-way communication with Watney. The Pathfinder signal was a one-way beacon, a simple "I'm alive" message. They needed to be able to talk to him, to get a full picture of his situation, and to collaborate on his survival. The engineers at JPL, working around the clock, devised a brilliant solution. They instructed Watney, through a series of yes/no questions transmitted via Pathfinder's limited capabilities, to modify the rover's communication system to be compatible with the lander. It was a complex and delicate operation, requiring Watney to hack into the rover's software and hardware, a task for which he was not specifically trained, but at which he proved remarkably adept. His log entries from this period are filled with a mixture of intense concentration and his usual brand of gallows humor, as he complains about the user-unfriendly interface of a multi-billion-dollar piece of space exploration hardware. Finally, after days of painstaking work, he succeeded. The first message from Earth, a simple text-based communication, appeared on his rover's screen. The feeling of seeing those words, of knowing that he was no longer alone, was overwhelming. For the first time in months, he was connected to another human being. The psychological relief was immense, a powerful antidote to the crushing loneliness that had been his constant companion. He could now communicate in real time, or as close to real time as the 20-minute light speed delay between Earth and Mars would allow. With the communication link established, NASA was able to get a full accounting of Watney's situation. They were in awe of his ingenuity, of his Martian farm, and his incredible journey to Pathfinder. But they also understood the precariousness of his existence. His potato crop was a brilliant solution, but it was a fragile one. Any number of things could go wrong, and a single crop failure would be a death sentence. The pressure on NASA to find a solution was immense. The world was watching, and the life of a hero was hanging in the balance. The best minds at NASA and JPL were put to the task. The initial plan was to send a resupply probe, an unmanned spacecraft packed with enough food and supplies to last Watney until the Ares 4 mission could arrive in 4 years. It was a race against time. The probe, codenamed Iris, had to be designed, built, and launched in an impossibly short time frame. Every day that passed was a day that brought Watney closer to starvation. The development of the Iris probe was a frantic, high-stakes endeavor. Corners were cut, safety protocols were streamlined, and the teams worked in a state of controlled chaos. The pressure to succeed was enormous, not just for Watney's sake, but for the reputation and future of the entire space program. While NASA wrestled with the logistics of the rescue, Watney settled into a new routine. He was no longer just a survivor. He was now an active participant in his own rescue. He communicated daily with the team on Earth, providing them with detailed reports on his status, his experiments, and the condition of his equipment. He also received instructions from them, a constant stream of advice and technical support. He had become an extension of NASA on Mars, their man on the ground. But the newfound connection to Earth was a double-edged sword. While it brought him immense comfort and support, it also brought a new level of scrutiny. He was no longer just accountable to himself. He was accountable to the entire world. His every action was being monitored, his every decision analyzed. The pressure to perform, to not make any mistakes, was intense. He also had to contend with the bureaucracy of NASA, a slow-moving and risk-averse organization that was now micromanaging his survival from millions of miles away. There were moments of frustration as he clashed with the well-intentioned, but often overly cautious instructions from Earth. He was the one on the ground, the one facing the immediate life or death consequences of every decision. Then, disaster struck. A tiny, almost imperceptible tear in the canvas of the hab's airlock, a flaw in the manufacturing process that had gone unnoticed for years, finally gave way. The result was a catastrophic explosive decompression. The air rushed out of the hab with terrifying force, and in an instant, the carefully controlled environment that had sustained him was gone. The internal pressure dropped to near vacuum, and the temperature plummeted to the frigid Martian norm. His potato plants, the foundation of his survival, were flash frozen, their delicate cells ruptured by the sudden change in pressure. The Martian soil, once teeming with his carefully cultivated bacteria, was now sterile and dead. His farm, his masterpiece of ingenuity and perseverance, was gone. He had been outside the hab at the time of the breach, and he could only watch in horror as his home, his sanctuary, was destroyed. The psychological blow was devastating. He had come so far, overcome so much, only to be brought to the brink of disaster by a random, unforeseeable accident. The fragility of his existence had been laid bare. He had survived the storm. He had created life from nothing. But he was still just one small, vulnerable human being on a planet that was utterly indifferent to his fate. The communication link with Earth, his lifeline, was now more critical than ever. He had to report the disaster, to let them know that his food supply was gone. The clock, which had been ticking loudly before, was now screaming. The Iris resupply mission was no longer just a priority. It was his only hope. The race to save Mark Watney had just become a desperate life or death sprint. The news of the hab's destruction and the loss of his potato crop sent a fresh wave of panic through NASA. Watney's carefully constructed plan for self-sufficiency had been shattered, and his timeline for survival had been drastically reduced. The Iris resupply probe, which had been proceeding with a sense of urgent but controlled haste, was now a mission of absolute, breakneck desperation. The launch window was unforgiving, and any delay could mean the difference between life and death for Watney. The pressure on the teams at JPL and Cape Canaveral was astronomical. They were working around the clock, pushing themselves and their equipment to the absolute limit. Every shortcut that could be taken was taken. Pre-flight inspections were cursory, safety checks were bypassed. The single-minded focus was on getting the probe off the ground and on its way to Mars as quickly as humanly possible. Teddy Sanders, the director of NASA, made the difficult and controversial decision to forego the standard safety inspections. A move that went against every protocol and every instinct of the risk-averse organization. He was gambling, betting the reputation of NASA and the very life of Mark Watney on the assumption that the engineers had done their job perfectly under immense pressure. The launch of the Iris probe was a global media event. The world held its collective breath as the rocket carrying the precious cargo roared to life and climbed into the Florida sky. For a few brief, glorious moments, it seemed as though the gamble had paid off. The launch was flawless, the trajectory perfect. A wave of relief washed over mission control. But the celebration was short-lived. As the probe continued its ascent, a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration began to shake the spacecraft. The strain of the accelerated launch, the cutting of corners, had taken its toll. A single, overloaded bolt failed, and the resulting imbalance sent the rocket into a catastrophic spin. It veered wildly off course, its delicate systems unable to compensate for the violent G-forces. And then, in a horrifying fireball that was visible for miles, the Iris probe disintegrated, taking with it all of Watney's food, his supplies, and his hope for survival. The failure of the Iris mission was a devastating blow. The mood at NASA was one of profound despair and recrimination. They had failed. They had let him down. The public, which had been so united in its support, now began to question NASA's competence. The media was relentless in its criticism, and the political pressure on Teddy Sanders and his team was immense. The news of the launch failure was the darkest moment of Watney's ordeal. He received the message from Earth in the cold, silent confines of his rover, the words on the screen delivering a death sentence. The carefully controlled optimism that had sustained him for so long finally crumbled. For the first time, he truly believed he was going to die. He had faced down every challenge, solved every problem, and it was all for nothing. He was going to starve to death, alone, on a desolate rock millions of miles from home. His log entries from this period are raw and unfiltered, a stark departure from his usual witty and resilient tone. He writes of his despair, his anger, and his profound, crushing sense of hopelessness. He had done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. He was at the mercy of forces far beyond his control, a pawn in a cosmic game that he was destined to lose. But even in this darkest of moments, a glimmer of hope emerged from an unexpected quarter. At JPL, a brilliant but eccentric astrodynamicist named Rich Purnell, a man who lived and breathed orbital mechanics, had been running his own unauthorized simulations. He was a maverick, an outsider who often clashed with the more conservative and bureaucratic elements of NASA. While everyone else had been focused on the Iris probe, Purnell had been working on a different, far more audacious plan. He had discovered a way to use the Hermes, the very ship that had left Watney behind, to rescue him. His plan, which would come to be known as the Rich Purnell maneuver, was a high-risk, high-reward gamble. It involved using a gravity assist maneuver around Earth to slingshot the Hermes back to Mars. The crew of the Hermes, who were currently on their final approach to Earth after their long and traumatic journey, would have to agree to turn around and head back for another 2-year journey. They would be pushed to the very limits of their physical and psychological endurance. The ship itself was not designed for such a long mission, and its life support systems would be stretched to their breaking point. When Purnell presented his plan to NASA's leadership, he was met with fierce resistance. It was too risky, too unconventional, too far outside the established protocols. Mitch Henderson, the flight director for the Ares 3 mission, was a staunch advocate for the plan. He argued that it was their only viable option, their only chance to save Watney. Teddy Sanders, however, was hesitant. The political fallout from another failure would be catastrophic. He was also unwilling to risk the lives of the 5 other astronauts on the Hermes for the sake of one man. He made the decision to reject the Purnell maneuver. But Mitch Henderson was not a man who took no for an answer. In a clandestine and highly unorthodox move, he leaked the details of the Purnell maneuver to the crew of the Hermes. He knew that if they were given the choice, they would not hesitate. He was right. When Commander Lewis and her crew learned that there was a chance, however slim, to save their friend and comrade, Their decision was unanimous and instantaneous. They would go back. In a tense and dramatic confrontation with NASA, they informed Mission Control of their decision. They were prepared to mutiny, to cut off communication, and proceed with the maneuver on their own if necessary. They were a team, and they would not leave a man behind, not again. Faced with this united front, and with the eyes of the world upon them, NASA had no choice but to relent. The Rich Purnell maneuver was on. The news was relayed to Watney, a sudden and unexpected reprieve from his death sentence. The emotional whiplash was immense. One moment he was staring into the abyss. The next he was being told that his crewmates, the people he thought he would never see again, were coming back for him. The flicker of hope, which had been all but extinguished, was rekindled. The race to save Mark Watney was back on, and it was now a race against time. A race to keep him alive until the Hermes could complete its long and perilous journey back to the Red Planet. With the Hermes now on its long and arduous journey back to Mars, the focus shifted back to keeping Mark Watney alive until its arrival. The failure of the IRIS probe meant that a conventional resupply was out of the question. There simply wasn't enough time to build and launch another one. The solution came from an unlikely source, the China National Space Administration, or CNSA. The Chinese had a powerful state-of-the-art rocket, the Tiantian, sitting on a launch pad, ready for its own scientific mission. In an unprecedented act of international cooperation, they offered it to NASA. It was a gesture that transcended the political rivalries and nationalistic ambitions that so often characterize the space race. The survival of one man had become a global cause, a symbol of humanity's shared values and aspirations. The Tiantian was a powerful booster, capable of carrying a significant payload to Mars on a much faster trajectory than the IRIS probe. The plan was to send a stripped-down, unmanned probe carrying enough food to sustain Watney until the Hermes arrived. The mission was a testament to the power of collaboration. As scientists and engineers from NASA and the CNSA worked side by side, sharing knowledge and resources to make the impossible possible. The launch of the Chinese probe was another moment of global tension and anticipation. The world watched, hoping and praying that this time the mission would succeed. The launch was flawless, a perfect execution of precision engineering and international teamwork. The probe was on its way, a lifeline hurtling through the void towards the stranded astronaut. The success of the launch was a huge morale boost for everyone involved, a much-needed victory after the devastating failure of the IRIS mission. But even with the resupply on its way, Watney's survival was far from guaranteed. The probe would provide him with food, but it wouldn't solve his biggest problem, how to get off the planet. The Hermes was not designed to land on Mars. It would perform a flyby, a high-speed pass through the Martian atmosphere. Watney would have to meet them in orbit. This meant that he would have to travel thousands of kilometers across the Martian surface to the landing site of the Ares 4 mission, where another MAV, the vehicle that would launch him into orbit, was waiting. The journey to the Schiaparelli crater, the location of the Ares 4 MAV, was a far more daunting undertaking than his earlier trip to Pathfinder. It was a journey of over 3,200 kilometers, a marathon trek across a hostile and unforgiving landscape. he would have to modify his rover even further, turning it into a mobile habitat capable of sustaining him for months on end. He essentially had to create a makeshift RV, complete with life support, power generation, and navigation systems. He spent weeks meticulously planning every detail of the journey. He plotted his route, calculated his power consumption, and rationed his remaining food with painstaking care. He stripped the hab of every useful component, cannibalizing his former home to create his new one. He loaded the rover with solar panels, extra batteries, and the life support systems he would need to survive the long and lonely journey. His log entries from this period are a fascinating blend of engineering manual and personal diary. He details the technical challenges he faces, the solutions he devises, and the psychological toll of his prolonged isolation. He talks to himself, he jokes with the rover, he does whatever it takes to keep his mind sharp and his spirits up. The journey itself was a slow and methodical process. He could only travel a limited distance each day before having to stop and recharge his batteries using his vast array of solar panels. The landscape he traversed was both beautiful and terrifying. A panorama of red sand dunes, jagged craters, and towering canyons. He was a solitary pioneer, the first human to explore these remote regions of Mars. He faced a constant barrage of challenges. A massive dust storm, far larger than any he had encountered before, blotted out the sun for days, threatening to drain his power reserves completely. He had to navigate through treacherous terrain, his rover teetering on the edge of steep cliffs and deep crevices. At one point, he had to use a makeshift sail to harness the thin Martian wind to help him up a steep incline, a testament to his seemingly endless capacity for creative problem solving. One of the most harrowing moments of his journey came when he lost contact with Earth. A communications blackout, caused by a system malfunction on the rover, plunged him back into the terrifying silence he had known at the beginning of his ordeal. For days, he was truly alone again, with no way of knowing if the Hermes was still on its way, if the resupply probe had been successful, or if he had been forgotten once more. The psychological strain was immense, a cruel reminder of the fragility of his connection to the rest of humanity. He worked frantically to repair the communication system, his hands shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. The moment he re-established contact, the wave of relief was palpable, a reaffirmation that he was not alone, that the entire world was with him on his journey. As he drew closer to the Schiaparelli crater, a new and daunting set of challenges emerged. The Ares 4 MAV was not a turnkey operation. It had been sitting on the Martian surface for years, and it would require significant modifications to be able to launch and rendezvous with the Hermes. NASA had been working on the problem from their end, developing a series of complex and risky modifications that Watney would have to implement himself. He would have to strip the MAV of all non-essential weight, including its life support systems, its seats, and even its nose cone. He would be launching into orbit in what was essentially a stripped-down, high-powered rocket with a piece of canvas covering the front. It was an incredibly dangerous plan, a desperate, last-ditch effort to get him off the planet. The margin for error was non-existent. Any miscalculation, any mistake in the modifications, and the MAV would either fail to launch or disintegrate on its way to orbit. The fate of Mark Watney, after all his struggles, after all his triumphs of ingenuity and perseverance, would come down to this one final, terrifying ride. He had crossed a planet. He had cheated death a dozen times over, but the most dangerous part of his journey was still ahead of him. The arrival at the Schiaparelli crater was a moment of both triumph and trepidation for Mark Watney. After a grueling, months-long journey across the desolate Martian landscape, the sight of the Ares 4 MAV, a silent, solitary sentinel of hope, was a powerful symbol of how far he had come. But his marathon trek was only the prelude to the most dangerous and technically demanding phase of his rescue. The MAV, in its current state, was designed to carry a full crew and their equipment on a standard ascent to a waiting Hermes. Watney's situation was anything but standard. He was a single passenger with a very specific and very difficult rendezvous target. To reach the Hermes, which would be making a high-speed flyby of Mars, the MAV would have to be lighter, much lighter. The plan, developed by the brilliant minds at NASA and JPL, was a radical and terrifying feat of engineering improvisation. Watney would have to perform what amounted to an open-heart surgery on the MAV, stripping it down to its bare essentials to shed every possible gram of mass. The list of modifications was long and daunting. He had to remove the backup communication systems, the extra seats, the control panels for the co-pilot, and even the life support systems. The MAV's cabin would be a hollowed-out shell, with only a single seat and the essential controls remaining. The most audacious and dangerous modification, however, involved the nose of the vehicle. The MAV's nose cone, a heavy and aerodynamically crucial component, had to be replaced with a much lighter alternative. The solution was as ingenious as it was terrifying. Watney would use a piece of the HABS canvas, the very material that had failed him so catastrophically before, to cover the gaping hole at the front of the MAV. He would be launching into orbit in what was essentially a convertible rocket, protected from the vacuum of space by a piece of fabric held in place by resin and prayer. The work was slow, methodical, and fraught with peril. He spent weeks carefully dismantling the complex systems of the MAV, following the detailed instructions relayed to him from Earth. Every wire he cut, every bolt he loosened, was a potential point of failure. A single mistake could render the MAV unflyable, stranding him permanently on Mars. The psychological pressure was immense. He was working on his own life raft, and any flaw in his workmanship would have fatal consequences. His log entries from this period are a testament to his intense focus and his unwavering professionalism. He double-checked every connection, tested every system, and meticulously documented his progress. The gallows humor was still there, but it was tempered by a new sense of gravity. He was no longer just a survivor. He was an astronaut preparing for the most important mission of his life. While Watney was busy modifying the MAV, the crew of the Hermes was preparing for their own set of high-stakes maneuvers. The rendezvous with Watney would be a complex and dangerous ballet of orbital mechanics. They had to adjust their trajectory with pinpoint accuracy to ensure they would be in the right place at the right time to catch the ascending MAV. The slightest miscalculation would send them hurtling past Mars, with no hope of a second chance. The crew was a well-oiled machine, their years of training and their shared experience forging them into a cohesive and formidable team. Commander Lewis, driven by her lingering guilt over leaving Watney behind, was a pillar of strength and determination. The rest of the crew, Martinez, Johansson, Vogel, and Beck, each had their own crucial roles to play in the upcoming rescue. They spent their days running simulations, practicing their procedures, and preparing for every conceivable contingency. One of the biggest challenges they faced was slowing the Hermes down enough to make the rendezvous possible. Their flyby velocity would be too high for the MAV to match. The solution was another audacious and unconventional plan. They would use a series of controlled explosions, detonating small charges on the ship's exterior to create a braking thrust. It was a crude and risky maneuver, a far cry from the elegant and precise orbital mechanics they were used to. But it was their only option. The ship would be shaken to its core, and its structural integrity would be pushed to its absolute limit. As the day of the rendezvous approached, the tension on both Mars and the Hermes reached a fever pitch. Watney completed his modifications to the MAV, a stripped-down, skeletal version of its former self. He conducted a series of final systems checks, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He was ready. On the Hermes, the crew made their final preparations. They strapped themselves in, their faces grim and focused. They were about to attempt the most audacious and dangerous rescue in the history of space exploration. The world watched, united in a shared sense of hope and anxiety. The live feed from the Hermes was broadcast globally, every moment of the drama unfolding in real time. The launch of the MAV was a moment of pure, unadulterated terror and triumph. Watney was thrown back in his seat as the powerful engines ignited, pushing him into the thin Martian sky with brutal force. The stripped-down rocket accelerated at a dizzying rate, the G-forces crushing him against his seat. Through the makeshift canvas nose cone, he could see the red landscape of Mars receding below him, a world that had been his home and his prison for so long. The ascent was rough and violent, the MAV shaking and groaning under the strain. But it held together. He was on his way. In orbit, the crew of the Hermes watched their screens, their hearts in their throats. The MAV was on a perfect trajectory, a tiny, ascending dot on their radar. But there was a problem. The MAV was not going to reach the required altitude. The weight reduction had not been enough. The rendezvous was going to fail. The gap between the two spacecraft was too large to bridge. The dream of rescue, so close to becoming a reality, was about to turn into a nightmare. In the control room of the Hermes, a stunned silence fell. They had come so far, they had sacrificed so much, and they were going to fail at the final hurdle. The world watched in horror, the shared hope turning to despair. But in the face of this new and seemingly insurmountable obstacle, the indomitable spirit of human ingenuity, the very spirit that had kept Mark Watney alive for so long, was about to stage its most daring and dramatic comeback. The realization that the MAV would not reach the Hermes sent a wave of despair through the crew of the returning ship and the millions watching on Earth. The carefully calculated trajectory was off, the rendezvous point an impossible distance away. After months of struggle, sacrifice, and international cooperation, the rescue was on the brink of a catastrophic failure. Mark Watney, having survived against all odds on the surface of Mars, was about to be lost in the cold, unforgiving vacuum of space, just meters from salvation. But in the face of this crushing disappointment, the human capacity for improvisation and sheer, unadulterated courage took center stage. On board the Hermes, Commander Lewis refused to accept defeat. Her mind, honed by years of training and leadership, raced through the possibilities, searching for any solution, no matter how desperate. The problem was simple. They needed to close the gap between the two vessels. The MAV was out of fuel, its ascent trajectory fixed. The Hermes, therefore, had to come to it. But how? Their orbital velocity was immense, their ability to maneuver limited. The answer came not from a pre-planned contingency, but from a moment of brilliant, spontaneous inspiration. It was a plan so audacious, so contrary to every safety protocol ever written, that it bordered on the insane. They would use the ship's own atmosphere as a propellant. By deliberately breaching the hull of the Hermes's forward airlock, they could create a powerful, albeit uncontrolled, thrust that would push the ship towards the MAV. It was a maneuver of last resort, a gamble that would subject the Hermes to immense structural stress and potentially render it uninhabitable. But it was their only shot. Commander Lewis, without a moment's hesitation, gave the order. The crew, united in their determination to save their friend, sprang into action. They sealed off the forward section of the ship, donned their emergency suits, and prepared for the controlled explosion that would breach the hull. The plan was for Rick Martinez, the pilot, to use the ship's thrusters to maintain stability while the escaping air pushed them forward. It was a feat of piloting that would require superhuman skill and nerves of steel. On the MAV, Watney could only watch as the Hermes, a beacon of hope in the blackness of space, grew larger in his makeshift viewport. He was aware that something was wrong, that the rendezvous was not going as planned. He was a passive observer in his own rescue, his fate now entirely in the hands of his crewmates. He could see the small, controlled explosion on the Hermes, the plume of escaping gas, a testament to their desperate, heroic gamble. The Hermes lurched forward, a wounded beast fighting against the laws of physics. The ship shuddered and groaned, the metal groaning in protest as the escaping atmosphere pushed it off its stable trajectory. Martinez fought with the controls, his knuckles white, his face a mask of intense concentration. He was flying by the seat of his pants, using his instincts and his years of experience to keep the ship from tumbling out of control. But even with this desperate maneuver, the gap was still too large. They were closer, but not close to being able to simply pluck Watney from his crippled MAV. A new plan was needed, another layer of improvisation on top of the already audacious plan. Chris Beck, the crew's EVA specialist, would have to go out and get him. He would be on a tether, but the distance he would have to cover was at the absolute limit of its length. And even then, he might not be able to reach the MAV. The solution was as simple as it was terrifying. Watney would have to use the pressure in his suit to propel himself towards Beck. He would have to puncture his own suit, creating a small, controlled jet of escaping air that would act as a makeshift thruster. It was an idea straight out of a science fiction comic book, a move that was both brilliant and insane. The final moments of the rescue were a breathtaking ballet of courage and precision. Beck, a solitary figure in the vastness of space, floated at the end of his tether, reaching out towards the MAV. On the other side of the void, Watney, with the calm and steady hands of a man who had faced death a dozen times over, prepared to take the ultimate leap of faith. He used a small tool to pierce the glove of his suit, and the escaping air sent him hurtling through the vacuum towards the waiting arms of his crewmate. For a few heart-stopping seconds, he was a human projectile, a man flying through space with nothing but a thin layer of fabric between him and oblivion. The world watched, silent and transfixed, as the two figures drew closer. And then, in a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, they connected. Beck grabbed hold of Watney, his gloved hand closing around his friend's arm. The connection was made. The rescue was complete. The moment Watney was pulled into the airlock of the Hermes, the tension that had gripped the world for so long finally broke. A wave of joyous relief swept through mission control, the cheers and applause echoing through the room. The crew of the Hermes, exhausted but triumphant, welcomed their lost comrade home. The reunion was emotional and profound, a moment of shared humanity that transcended the vastness of space. Watney, emaciated and weak but alive, was finally safe. He had survived 561 sols on Mars, a testament to his own resilience and the unwavering dedication of the people who had refused to give up on him. His ordeal was over, but the long journey home had just begun. The crew of the Hermes, now reunited and whole, set their course for Earth, their ship battered but their spirits unbroken. They were heroes, not just for their daring rescue, but for their embodiment of the very best of what humanity could be: brave, resourceful, and unwilling to leave anyone behind. The story of Mark Watney, the Martian, was no longer a story of survival. It was a story of homecoming. And as the Hermes began its long journey back to the distant blue dot of Earth, the world celebrated a victory that was not just for NASA or for America, but for all of humankind. The successful rescue of Mark Watney was a moment of global catharsis, a collective sigh of relief that reverberated around the world. The image of Chris Beck and Watney, two solitary figures embracing in the void of space, became an instant and enduring symbol of human courage and solidarity. On board the Hermes, the atmosphere was one of triumphant exhaustion. The immediate life or death tension of the rendezvous had dissipated, replaced by the quiet, profound reality of their achievement. Watney, frail and emaciated from his long ordeal, was finally among his crewmates. The familiar faces a powerful antidote to the crushing loneliness he had endured for so long. His initial medical assessment, conducted by Dr. Beck, revealed the predictable effects of long-term malnutrition and the physical trauma of his high-G launch and subsequent spacewalk. He was weak, his muscles atrophied, but he was alive and, remarkably, in good spirits. His sense of humor, the very thing that had kept him sane during his darkest moments on Mars, remained intact. His reunion with Commander Lewis was particularly poignant. The weight of her guilt, the burden she had carried since making the decision to leave him behind, was finally lifted. In a quiet, heartfelt conversation, Watney reassured her that she had made the right call, that he understood the impossible choice she had been forced to make. It was a moment of forgiveness and closure, a healing of the wound that had separated them for so long. The long journey home was a period of slow and steady recovery for Watney. He was put on a carefully managed diet to rebuild his strength, and he began a rigorous regimen of physical therapy to counteract the effects of muscle atrophy. The crew of the Hermes, who had been pushed to their own physical and psychological limits, also began the process of decompressing from their extended and unexpectedly dramatic mission. They were no longer just a crew, they were a family, forged in the crucible of shared adversity. The days on the Hermes settled into a routine, a stark contrast to the constant life or death struggle that had defined Watney's existence on Mars. He spent his time catching up on the news from Earth, learning about the global phenomenon his survival had become. He was humbled and a little overwhelmed by the extent to which his personal struggle had captured the world's imagination. He read the countless messages of support that had been sent from people all over the planet, a powerful reminder of the human connection that had sustained him even when he was completely alone. He also spent a great deal of time talking with his crewmates, sharing the details of his ordeal, the triumphs and the terror, the moments of brilliant improvisation and the moments of crushing despair. His stories were a source of both awe and amusement for the crew. They listened, rapt, as he described his Martian farm, his perilous journey to Pathfinder, and his audacious modifications to the Ares 4 MAV. His log entries, which he had so diligently maintained throughout his time on Mars, became a source of shared entertainment. His witty and often profane observations providing a much-needed dose of levity. But beneath the humor, there was a profound and shared understanding of the immense risks they had all taken, the sacrifices they had all made. They had all, in their own way, been pushed to the brink, and they had all emerged stronger and more united. Back on Earth, the world was preparing for the return of its heroes. The story of the Hermes and its crew had become a global obsession. Documentaries were being made, books were being written, and the crew members themselves had become international celebrities. The political and public relations machinery of NASA was in full swing, carefully managing the narrative of the mission's triumphant conclusion. The international cooperation with the China National Space Administration had ushered in a new era of collaboration in space exploration. A silver lining to the near disaster of the Ares 3 mission. The focus was on the future, on the lessons learned, and on the renewed sense of purpose and possibility that the mission had inspired. For Watney, the prospect of returning to Earth was a strange and slightly daunting one. He had become accustomed to the silence and solitude of Mars, to the simplicity of his existence. The idea of returning to a world of 7 billion people, to the noise and complexity of modern life, was a little overwhelming. He had been the loneliest man in the universe, and now he was about to become one of the most famous. He knew that his life would never be the same, that he would forever be the Martian, the man who had survived against all odds. He also knew that he had a responsibility to use his newfound fame for something good, to inspire a new generation of scientists and explorers, to champion the cause of human exploration and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. As the Hermes drew closer to Earth, the blue and white marble of home growing larger in the viewport, a sense of anticipation and nostalgia began to build among the crew. had been away for a long time, and they had been through more than any of them could have ever imagined. They had faced death, they had defied the odds, and they had pulled off the most audacious rescue in human history. They were coming home not just as astronauts, but as symbols of the very best of what humanity could achieve when it worked together, when it refused to give up, and when it dared to reach for the stars. The final leg of their journey was a time of reflection and quiet contemplation, a calm before the storm of their triumphant return to Earth. They had been to Mars and back, and they were forever changed by the experience. And as they prepared for their re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, they knew that their story, the story of the Martian, would be told and retold for generations to come. A timeless testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The return of the Hermes to Earth was an event of unprecedented global significance. The world, which had been captivated by every twist and turn of Mark Watney's incredible saga, held its breath for the final, triumphant chapter. The media coverage was relentless, with news channels broadcasting live from every corner of the globe. All eyes turned to the heavens. For the crew of the Hermes, the re-entry into Earth's atmosphere was the final, fiery hurdle in their long and arduous journey. After the stripped-down, high-risk launch of the MAV and the audacious, hull-breaching maneuver to rescue Watney, the re-entry in a standard capsule felt almost routine, a welcome return to the familiar and the predictable. The landing, a gentle splashdown in the Pacific Ocean, was met with a chorus of cheers that echoed from Mission Control in Houston to the crowded streets of cities around the world. The heroes were home. The immediate aftermath of their return was a whirlwind of activity. The crew was whisked away to a secure medical facility for a period of quarantine and debriefing. The world was eager to see them, to celebrate their return, but the first priority was their health and well-being. For Watney, the return to Earth's gravity was a significant physical challenge. After months in the low-gravity environments of Mars and the Hermes, his body had to reacclimate to the full force of Earth's pull. The process was slow and uncomfortable, a constant reminder of the alien world he had left behind. His medical team, a dedicated group of NASA's top doctors and physiologists, monitored his progress closely, marveling at his resilience and his remarkably positive attitude. The debriefings were long and intensive. Every detail of the mission, from the initial storm on Mars to the final, dramatic rescue, was meticulously documented and analyzed. The data they had collected, the lessons they had learned, would be invaluable for future missions to Mars and beyond. Watney, in particular, was a treasure trove of information. His first-hand experience of long-term survival on Mars was a priceless resource, a living textbook for the future of space exploration. He recounted his experiences with his characteristic wit and precision, his log entries providing a detailed and often humorous account of his daily struggles and triumphs. He described the process of creating his Martian farm, the perilous journey to Pathfinder, and the audacious modifications to the MAV. His stories painting a vivid and deeply personal picture of his time on the Red Planet. The psychological debriefings were just as important as the technical ones. The crew had been through a traumatic and life-altering experience, and the psychological toll was significant. They had faced death. They had grappled with guilt and fear, and they had been subjected to the intense and unrelenting pressure of global scrutiny. The NASA psychologists helped them to process their experiences, to come to terms with the profound changes that the mission had wrought in their lives. For Watney, the transition from the loneliest man in the universe to a global celebrity was a particularly challenging one. He was hounded by the media, his every move scrutinized, his every word analyzed. He had gone from a world of absolute solitude to a world of constant attention, and the adjustment was not an easy one. He found solace in the camaraderie of his crewmates, the only other people on the planet who could truly understand what he had been through. They were his anchors in a sea of newfound fame and expectation. Once the initial period of quarantine and debriefing was over, the crew of the Hermes embarked on a global goodwill tour. They were fated as heroes, their story a source of inspiration and unity in a world often divided by conflict and discord. They met with world leaders. They gave speeches at universities and scientific institutions, and they shared their experiences with millions of people around the world. Watney, in particular, became a powerful advocate for science and exploration. He used his platform to champion the importance of STEM education, to inspire a new generation of young people to pursue careers in science and engineering. He was a living embodiment of the power of human ingenuity, a testament to the idea that with knowledge, determination, and a healthy dose of creativity, no problem is insurmountable. The story of the Martian had a profound and lasting impact on the future of space exploration. The international cooperation that had been forged in the crucible of the rescue mission ushered in a new era of collaboration. The lessons learned from Watney's ordeal led to significant advancements in life support systems, habitat design, and emergency preparedness. The Ares program was revitalized with a renewed sense of purpose and a fresh injection of funding. The dream of a permanent human presence on Mars, which had once seemed like a distant and abstract goal, was now a tangible and achievable reality. The world had been reminded of the power of exploration, of the fundamental human need to push the boundaries of what is possible, to reach for the unknown. The story of one man's struggle for survival had become a story about the future of all humanity. For Mark Watney, the return to a normal life was a long and ongoing process. He would forever be the man who had lived on Mars, a title that brought with it both immense privilege and a heavy burden of responsibility. He would never again be just an anonymous scientist, just another face in the crowd. But he accepted his new role with grace and humor, a reluctant hero who had been forged in the red dust of a distant world. He had faced the ultimate test of survival, and he had not only endured, he had triumphed. And in doing so, he had reminded the world of a simple but profound truth, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit, with its boundless capacity for hope, ingenuity, and resilience, can find a way to survive, to connect, and to come home. In the years that followed the triumphant return of the Hermes, the world was a different place. The story of Mark Watney had left an indelible mark on the human psyche, a permanent and positive shift in the global consciousness. The Watney effect, as it came to be known, was a multifaceted phenomenon. It was a renewed public enthusiasm for science and exploration. a surge in funding for space programs around the world, and a new generation of young people inspired to pursue careers in STEM fields. The grainy images of a lone astronaut cultivating potatoes in the red dust of Mars had done more to advance the cause of human spaceflight than 1,000 political speeches or scientific papers. The story was a powerful and universal one, a tale of survival that resonated with people from all walks of life in every corner of the globe. For the crew of the Hermes, life would never be the same. They were international heroes, their names etched in the annals of human history. Commander Lewis, once haunted by the specter of her decision to leave Watney behind, was now celebrated for her courage and leadership in orchestrating his rescue. The rest of the crew, Martinez, Johansson, Vogel, and Beck, each found their own way to navigate their newfound fame, some embracing the spotlight, others shying away from it. But they were forever bound by their shared experience, a unique and unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of their long and perilous journey. They remained a close-knit family, a private club of 6 who had been to the edge of human experience and back. Mark Watney, the man at the center of it all, found a new purpose in his life on Earth. He embraced his role as an ambassador for science and exploration, a reluctant celebrity who used his platform to inspire and educate. He became an instructor for new astronaut candidates. His first-hand experience of survival on Mars, providing a unique and invaluable perspective. He taught them not just the technical skills they would need to survive in the hostile environment of space, but the mental fortitude, the resilience, and the creative problem-solving that had been the keys to his own survival. He was a living legend, a man who had faced the ultimate test and emerged not just alive, but with a profound sense of purpose and a wicked sense of humor that had endeared him to the world. The Ares program, once on the brink of being a cautionary tale, was revitalized and expanded. The lessons learned from the near disaster of Ares 3 were incorporated into every aspect of future missions. Habitats were redesigned, life support systems were made more robust, and contingency plans were developed for every conceivable scenario. The international cooperation that had been so crucial to Watney's rescue became the new standard, with NASA, the CNSA, and other space agencies around the world working together on a new generation of missions to Mars. The goal was no longer just to visit the red planet, but to establish a permanent human presence there, a stepping stone to the rest of the solar system. The dream of a multi-planetary species, once the domain of science fiction, was now a tangible and achievable goal. The legacy of the Martian is not just a story of technological achievement and scientific ingenuity. It is a story about the very best of what it means to be human. It is a story about the power of hope in the face of despair, the importance of community in the face of isolation, and the indomitable will to survive that lies at the core of the human spirit. It is a story that reminds us that we are all in this together, that our shared humanity is a more powerful force than any of the things that divide us. The image of the world uniting to save one man is a powerful and enduring one, a testament to our capacity for empathy and compassion on a global scale. In the end, the story of Mark Watney is a profoundly optimistic one. It is a story that tells us that even when we are faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges, even when we are lost and alone in the vast, unforgiving darkness, there is always a way forward. There is always a problem to be solved, a solution to be found, a connection to be made. It is a story that celebrates the power of reason, the beauty of science, and the boundless potential of the human mind. And it is a story that leaves us with a sense of hope and wonder, a belief that our future among the stars is not just a possibility, but a destiny waiting to be fulfilled. The man who was once the loneliest person in the universe had, in the end, brought the world closer together. A final, ironic, and beautiful twist in the incredible saga of The Martian. Andy Weir's The Martian is more than just a gripping tale of survival. It is a powerful and resonant ode to human ingenuity, resilience, and the unifying power of a shared purpose. Through the character of Mark Watney, Weir masterfully crafts a narrative that is both scientifically rigorous and deeply human, a story that celebrates the power of reason and the relentless optimism of the human spirit. The novel's enduring impact lies in its ability to inspire, to remind us of the incredible things we can achieve when we work together, when we put aside our differences and focus on a common goal. Watney's ordeal is a microcosm of the human experience, a testament to our innate ability to adapt, to innovate, and to find hope in the most desolate of circumstances. The Martian is a timeless and important work, a story that will continue to captivate and inspire readers for generations to come. A powerful reminder that even in the vast, cold emptiness of space, the warmth of human connection and the bright spark of human ingenuity can light the way home.